The realm of infinite possibilities was no ordinary church. Situated on a hill, it towered over the landscape, drawing crowds from miles away. Every Sunday, the pews were filled, eager worshippers anticipating not only the presence of God but of the man who had become their living legend, Pastor Caleb, known to his congregation as Daddy Possibilities. His presence commanded attention the moment he walked through the doors, impeccably dressed in a designer suit, polished shoes gleaming under the lights, and followed by a convoy of luxury cars. He was as much a celebrity as he was a pastor, his fame spreading far beyond the church walls. Women adored him, affectionately calling him Daddy, as they whispered about his spiritual anointing, while men bowed to him in respect, seeking his wisdom and guidance for their families and businesses. Pastor Caleb had become a symbol of success, a man who could solve any problem, for a price. The church was alive with energy, the choir belting out songs that filled the room with electric anticipation. As Pastor Caleb took the stage, gripping the microphone with authority, his voice boomed through the speakers, declaring that God was about to perform miracles. The congregation erupted in applause, their faith unshaken, their hopes high. But behind the veneer of miracles and prosperity, there was an undercurrent of something darker. The people who filled the pews were desperate for the blessings he promised, but they were blind to the secrets he hid in the shadows. After the service, Mrs. Blessing approached Pastor Caleb with her daughter, Faith. The young girl was quiet, standing nervously beside her mother, clutching her hand as though it were the only thing keeping her grounded. Mrs. Blessing's voice trembled slightly as she asked Pastor Caleb for a special prayer for Faith. The girl had just completed her schoolwork and was hoping to gain admission to the university. It was the kind of prayer only Daddy Possibilities could provide. With a smile that radiated charisma, Pastor Caleb turned his gaze to Faith, his eyes locking onto hers in a way that sent a shiver down her spine. God has great plans for you, my daughter, he said, his voice warm yet firm. Come forward. Faith stepped forward hesitantly, the air thick with tension. Pastor Caleb placed his hands on her head, murmuring words of prayer, his grip surprisingly firm for someone so gentle in appearance. The crowd watched in silence, their eyes fixed on the altar. After the prayer, Pastor Caleb straightened up, his gaze shifting to Faith with an intensity that made her stomach churn. There is something special about you. Come back later for a deeper prayer. God is about to open doors for you. Mrs. Blessing beamed with gratitude. Thank you, Daddy. We will be back. As they left the church, Faith felt a gnawing unease, but her mother was too excited to notice. Later that evening, in the quiet of their home, Faith couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. She sat in the corner of the living room, watching her mother prepare dinner, her mind swirling with confusion. She didn't want to go back to Pastor Caleb for the special prayer. She had prayed enough in her life to know that God could answer her without needing someone else's intervention. Mama, she started, her voice trembling, I don't think I should go back to Daddy Possibilities. I want to pray on my own. God will hear me. Mrs. Blessing paused, the knife in her hand midair, and turned to face her daughter. A look of disbelief crossed her face. What nonsense are you talking about, Faith? Do you think you know God better than Daddy Possibilities? He's a man of God, and his prayers work. Yours won't be as powerful. You're just being stubborn. Tomorrow, we are going back. That's final. Faith's heart sank. She tried to explain again, but her mother's words were like walls closing in around her. He knows what's best for you, Mrs. Blessing said dismissively. You see. Faith said nothing more. She knew there was no point in arguing. But deep inside, a sense of dread took root. The next day, Faith returned to the church. She tried to suppress the anxiety building in her chest as an usher led her to Pastor Caleb's office. When she walked in, the pastor stood to greet her, his smile wide but his eyes holding a peculiar intensity. Something in the air felt off, and Faith instinctively stepped back, clutching her bag tighter. "My daughter," Pastor Caleb said warmly, motioning for her to sit. "God has revealed something about you. Your destiny is bright, but there are forces trying to stop you." Faith felt the weight of his words settle over her. She didn't know what to say. "Come closer," he instructed. Reluctantly, she moved closer to his desk, her heartbeat quickening with every step. Pastor Caleb placed his hands on her head again, but this time, there was something different in the way he held her. His grip tightened. The prayer was strange. It didn't feel like any prayer she had ever heard before. And when it was over, his voice shifted. "You must come back later for a special prayer. Only then will God open the doors for you," he said, his eyes lingering on her with a look that made her stomach turn. Faith nodded numbly, barely able to process what had just happened. She left his office in a daze, her body trembling with a fear she couldn't explain. The door clicked shut behind her with an ominous finality. At home that evening, Faith couldn't bear to look her mother in the eye. She had returned from the church with her heart heavier than ever, but Mrs. Blessing's only question was, how was the prayer session? Faith struggled to find her voice. "Mama. I don't think Daddy Possibilities is what he seems." Mrs. Blessing's expression darkened. "What are you saying, Faith? That a man of God is not who he claims to be. Do you want to bring a curse upon this house?" "I'm not saying that, Mama," Faith pleaded, her voice trembling. "Something's wrong. You don't understand. It's not just about the prayer, something happened." But Mrs. Blessing wasn't listening. "Enough," she shouted, slamming the knife onto the cutting board. "Stop talking nonsense. You just don't like church, that's all. Go to your room." Faith's heart shattered as she turned away from her mother's wrath. She wanted to scream, to tell her everything, but what good would it do? No one would believe her. Each day felt like a battle, a slow spiral deeper into despair. Faith was called back to Pastor Caleb's office time and time again, each visit more terrifying than the last. She couldn't escape him, couldn't escape the hold he had on her. And every time she tried to confide in her mother, the walls of denial only grew higher. Mrs. Blessing's unwavering faith in Pastor Caleb left Faith feeling more and more isolated. She was trapped in a prison of fear and silence, unable to break free. One evening, as the service at the Realm of Infinite Possibilities wrapped up, a sense of foreboding hung in the air. Tim and his wife Tina sat in the congregation, their thoughts clouded by the growing sense that something was wrong. Tina tried to shake off her husband's unease, but deep down, she couldn't ignore the feeling either. As Pastor Caleb moved through the crowd, calling out prophetic words to his followers, Tim couldn't shake the image of Faith sitting quietly in the back, her eyes empty and distant. Something about the whole spectacle unsettled him. "That's enough," Tim whispered to Tina, his voice tight with suspicion. "I don't think I can ignore this anymore." Tina shot him a confused look. "What do you mean?" Tim hesitated before speaking, the weight of his words heavy on his chest. "Something doesn't feel right about this church. I don't trust him." Tina frowned, her hand resting on her husband's arm. "But Tim, Daddy Possibilities has helped so many people. He's a man of God." "I don't know anymore," Tim replied, his voice shaky. "I think we need to be careful." But as the service continued, with the crowd fervently praising Pastor Caleb, the feeling of unease that had been building inside Tim refused to go away. In that moment, he realized that whatever was happening in this church, it wasn't just about Faith. It was about something much darker. Faith sat alone in her room, clutching her diary to her chest. The weight of the truth she could never speak, was suffocating. She had tried everything to get someone to listen, but all she received was rejection and disbelief. Her mother, her father, the congregation, no one would believe her. She turned to the diary, her only confidant, and began writing one last message. If anyone finds this, know the truth. Pastor Caleb is not who he says he is. He has hurt me, and I can't live like this anymore. She wiped away the tears that blurred her vision, knowing this was the only way out. Her hand trembled as she reached under the bed for the bottle of pills. This was the end of her torment. With shaky hands, she took the pills, swallowing them all at once. She laid back on her bed, clutching the diary to her chest, her eyes closing as the darkness began to take over. The truth, however, was not as easily hidden as Pastor Caleb thought. The weight of his actions would eventually catch up with him, and the secrets buried within the walls of the realm of infinite possibilities would come to light, one way or another.